The sun came up mean over Red Hollow Ranch, slicing through the frost like a blade. The wind carried the bite of winter, though the calendar said spring. Eleanor Whitfield, Ellie to the few who still dared call her by name, was already at the troughs, her hands raw and red from the cold water. The wooden pail's handle rubbed blisters into her palms, and every motion burned. Her breath came out in pale ribbons. The smell of hay, iron, and sweat clung to her like a second skin. Out beyond the corral, the horses stirred against their ropes, tails flicking at the flies that never seemed to die, even in the chill. Ellie could feel the weight of the morning pressing against her spine. She'd been awake since before dawn, same as every day since her father took over her late mother's ranch. What once had been a home now stood as a prison fenced in by barbed wire and her father's rage. Thomas Whitfield was a man whose voice could curdle milk. His boots struck the earth like gunfire, and when he spoke, his words carried the sting of judgment and whiskey both. "Move faster, girl," he barked from the porch. "You think those troughs fill themselves?" Ellie didn't answer. She'd learned long ago that silence was safer than truth. Her arms trembled as she lifted another bucket, water sloshing against her dress, soaking through the fabric. The hem was tattered, her apron gray from use. Once upon a time, her mother had sewn her dresses in bright colors, blue like mountain lakes, yellow like buttercups. Now she wore brown and gray, the colors of dust and servitude. "Lazy," Thomas muttered. "Just like your mother before she died." Her jaw clenched. She didn't look up. The memory of her mother was the last sacred thing she had left, and she wouldn't let his words defile it. When the troughs were full, she turned toward the barn, shoulders tight beneath her thin shawl. The smell of horsehide and straw filled the air, grounding her. Inside, she found her solace, a mare named Clementine. Ellie ran her hand along the horse's neck, whispering words she could never speak aloud. "I know," she murmured. "I know it hurts." The horse flicked its ears, as if in answer. That's when the door slammed open. Her father stood framed in the light, whip in hand. The leather was old but cruelly tended, the tip freshly oiled. His face was carved from years of bitterness, his jawline grizzled, eyes red-rimmed from drink. "I told you to fix that fence post yesterday," he growled. "I did," Ellie said, barely above a whisper. "You calling me a liar?" Her heart pounded. She shook her head, stepping back, but there was nowhere to go. The whip unfurled like a serpent, snapping once in warning. "You'll learn your place, girl." She flinched. The sound alone brought tears to her eyes. And that's when a voice came from the doorway, low, steady, with the weight of thunder restrained. "That's enough." Both turned. A stranger stood silhouetted against the morning sun. Dust clung to his duster, his hat shadowing eyes that caught the light like cold steel. A rifle hung from his shoulder, though he didn't touch it. He didn't have to. Thomas sneered. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped forward, boots slow, deliberate. "Name's Silas McGraw. Heard this ranch was hiring hands." His gaze shifted to Ellie, then to the whip still hanging loose in her father's grasp. "Didn't know the work came with beatings." "This is family business," Thomas snapped. "Ain't your concern." Silas's eyes never left the older man. "Looks like my concern now." Ellie's breath caught. Something in his voice, something firm and quiet, pulled at the hollow place inside her chest. No one had ever stood between her and her father's wrath before. Thomas's lip curled. "You'd best leave, boy, before you end up in the dirt." Silas took another step, slow and sure. "You can try." For a moment the world stilled. Even the horses quieted, watching. Then, with a grunt of rage, Thomas raised the whip. But Silas was faster. His hand shot out, catching the braided leather midair. The crack that should have followed never came. The whip went taut between them, Silas's knuckles white, his jaw tight. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. "Not again," he said, voice low and final. The words cut deeper than any lash could. Thomas froze, stunned by the quiet authority in them. His grip faltered, the whip slipping loose. Ellie stood still, breath shivering. For the first time in years, she saw her father step back. Just an inch, but it was enough. Silas's gaze softened as he turned to her. "You all right, miss?" Her throat worked. "Ah, yes, I'm fine." "You don't look fine." She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words caught somewhere behind her ribs. Thomas spat in the dirt. "You'll regret this, Drifter." "Maybe," Silas said, "but not today." He dropped the whip to the ground, the sound dull against the packed earth. Then he tipped his hat to Ellie and stepped outside, the sunlight cutting across his shoulders. Ellie stared after him, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. The whip lay coiled at her feet like a dead snake. She knew, even then, that nothing on Red Hollow Ranch would ever be the same again. The day after the whip fell silent, Red Hollow Ranch felt different. The air itself seemed to carry a weight of something unseen, uneasy, expectant. Ellie felt it in her chest as she stepped into the morning chill, the kind of cold that bit through wool and bone alike. From the porch, she saw her father standing with that same hard squint, hat low over his brow, watching a lone figure saddle a horse by the fence line. Silas McGraw. He moved like a man who'd been raised by the land itself. Steady, no wasted motion. Every strap he tightened, every knot he checked spoke of years under open skies and miles of solitude. Thomas spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "He can work," he muttered, as if convincing himself, "if he keeps his mouth shut." Ellie didn't answer. The words from yesterday still echoed in her skull. Not again. Her hands itched to touch the whip still lying forgotten in the barn's corner, coiled and silent. She hadn't dared move it, afraid her father might notice. But the silence that had followed that moment, it was sacred. Like the land had taken a breath and refused to exhale. By midday, Silas was driving fence posts into the hard Wyoming soil, his shirt darkened at the back with sweat. Ellie watched from across the yard, pretending to scrub laundry but finding her eyes drawn to the rhythm of his labor. Each swing of the mallet sent a dull thud through the ground. Dust rose around him, catching sunlight like gold. His jaw was rough with stubble, his eyes hidden under the shadow of his hat. He didn't look toward her, not once, but somehow she felt seen all the same. Thomas's voice cracked through the quiet. "Girl, you done dreamin'? There's dinner to fix." Ellie jumped, her heart quick. "Yes, sir." As she turned toward the house, she dared one more glance toward the stranger. Silas paused mid-swing, as though he'd felt her gaze. For the smallest moment, his eyes lifted, gray, cool, unreadable, and then he went back to work. She carried that single look with her like a secret flame. The kitchen smelled of onions and lard. Her hands worked on instinct, peeling, chopping, stirring, while her mind wandered beyond the walls. She could still hear the faint rhythm of the mallet outside. A strange comfort. By the time the sun sank low, painting the plains in amber and rose, she set the table. Her father entered first, smelling of whiskey and dust. Silas followed, slower, his boots careful on the floorboards. Ellie caught his glance again, a brief flicker before he looked away. Thomas grunted, motioning toward the empty seat. "You want to earn supper, sit down." Silas nodded once. "Much obliged." His voice held that quiet thunder again. Firm, polite, unshakable. The three of them sat, the clink of cutlery filling the silence. Ellie kept her eyes on her plate. "So," Thomas began, his tone testing, "you from around these parts?" "No, sir." "Where from, then?" Silas took a slow bite, swallowed. "All over." Thomas snorted. "That's what you tell the law, too?" Ellie froze. Her father's words carried that edge she knew too well, the one that came before trouble. Silas didn't rise to it. Ain't had cause to talk to him. A beat of silence. Then Thomas leaned back, smirking. "Men who don't talk about their past usually got one worth hidin'." Silas looked up then, calm as still water. "Maybe so." The tension was so tight that it choked the air. Ellie's fingers trembled as she refilled her father's glass. Thomas's laugh was short and mean. "Long as you swing a hammer better than you talk, we won't have trouble." Silas's gaze shifted to Ellie for half a heartbeat. "I don't start trouble, Mr. Whitfield." He set his fork down, voice level. "I end it." Her father's smile faltered. Ellie swallowed a small, sharp breath. She didn't dare let it show, but something inside her, something that had been locked away for years, stirred at his words. After supper, Thomas stumbled out to the porch with his bottle, muttering curses into the night. Ellie gathered dishes, hands shaking. The lamplight cast her shadow long across the wall. Silas stayed behind, silent, until she turned to find him beside the basin, sleeves rolled up. "You don't have to," she began. "Reckon I do," he interrupted softly, taking a plate from her and rinsing it in the water. The motion was simple, ordinary, but for Ellie, it felt like something holy. No man had ever stood beside her like that, not in work or in silence. "I owe you," she said, her voice quiet. He shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing." She hesitated, fingers brushing the rim of a chipped cup. "Why'd you stop him yesterday?" Silas's shoulders went still. He stared at the dark window for a long moment. "Had a sister once," he said at last. "Someone should have stopped the man who hurt her. No one did." The air between them shifted, so heavy, so human. Ellie's breath trembled. What happened to her? He didn't answer, just set the plate aside, the sound gentle, final. Outside, the wind howled low across the prairie. "Get some rest, Miss Whitfield," he said quietly. "Tomorrow'll come early." She wanted to tell him to call her Ellie. She wanted to tell him that his words had carved warmth into her bones. But she only nodded, lips pressed tight. When he stepped out into the dark, she stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of soap and dust lingering like a memory. Through the open window, she could see him crossing the yard, lantern light flickering across his back. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone in that house. The days that followed bled together, the way they always did, but something in the rhythm of Red Hollow Ranch had shifted. So subtle it was like a new current under the river's surface. Ellie felt it every time Silas McGraw's shadow crossed her path, every time her father's gaze lingered too long, suspicious and dark. The mornings came cold, the kind of cold that cracked the water troughs before sunrise and turned breath into smoke. Ellie rose before light, pulling on her worn shawl and stepping into a world washed in gray. She found Silas already at work each morning, as though he never slept. Fences fixed before she woke, stables mended, the yard swept clean of what yesterday left behind. His silence wasn't cruel. It was the kind that filled the air with presence instead of emptiness. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. One morning, she caught him near the corral, sleeve torn where it caught a nail. The fabric hung loose, and beneath it, a pale scar crossed his forearm, a long, healed burn. "Need that mended," she said quietly, stepping forward before she thought better of it. He looked down, then at her, the faintest hint of a smile ghosting across his face. "Can't sew it myself without making a worse mess." She reached out before she could stop herself. Her fingers brushed the edge of the fabric. "I can fix it." "Much obliged," he said, voice low, and removed his coat, handing it to her. The weight of it surprised her, smelling faintly of leather, dust, and cedar smoke. As she carried it to the porch to sit and stitch, her father's voice rang out from across the yard. "What's that drifter got you doing now?" Ellie froze. "Just mending a tear, Pa." Thomas Whitfield stalked closer, his boots grinding against the dirt. His eyes burned beneath the brim of his hat. "He can mend his own damn clothes." Silas turned slowly, jaw tightening. "Didn't ask her to, Mr. Whitfield." "Then why's she doing it?" Silas's voice stayed calm, level as a church bell. "Because she's kind. That's all." Thomas's nostrils flared. "You watch your words, boy. You're a hired hand, not part of this family." "I'm well aware." The air between them was a wire stretched thin. Ellie could feel it hum through her skin. She rose from the porch steps, her voice trembling but steady. "Pa, please, get back inside, girl," he snapped. The words struck harder than any hand. Silas's jaw worked once before he looked away. "Ain't worth it," he murmured. Ellie turned, the coat heavy in her hands, her throat thick with something she couldn't name. That night, the wind came hard out of the north, screaming across the plains. The house creaked with it. Ellie sat by the kitchen stove, the patched sleeve folded neatly beside her. The coat was repaired, but she couldn't bring herself to take it back yet. It felt like a promise she wasn't ready to give back. From the window, she could see lantern light in the bunkhouse. A figure moved there, Silas, alone, his silhouette outlined against the glow. She imagined him sitting by that flame, hands clasped, maybe thinking of his sister, the one he never spoke of again. The clock ticked slowly. Her father's heavy boots paced upstairs, restless. She jumped when the back door creaked open. Silas stood there, hat in hand, the night cold clinging to him. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "You didn't," she lied. He nodded toward the folded coat. "Figured you'd have it done by now. Just finished." She held it out, careful not to meet his eyes. The sleeve should hold. He took it gently. "Thank you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't say. "You shouldn't talk back to him," she whispered. "He'll make you pay for it. I've had worse." His tone was quiet but not prideful, just a fact. "You don't know him like I do." He studied her then, gaze steady, searching. "You scared of him?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no. She wanted to be brave. But the word that came out was the truth. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then you ain't weak for it. You just know what kind of man he is." Her eyes burned. "And what kind is that?" "The kind that breaks what he can't control." The wind rattled the shutters. Outside, the prairie howled like a wounded thing. Ellie swallowed hard. "Why'd you stay? You could have gone after what happened." Silas slipped his coat back on, his movements slow, deliberate. "Because sometimes walking away's the same as turning your back on a wrong. I got enough ghosts already." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Whitfield." "Ellie," she said softly. He paused in the doorway. "What's that?" "My name. Call me Ellie." His eyes met hers, and something flickered there, gentle, dangerous. "Good night, Ellie." When he left, her hands trembled, not from fear this time but from something deeper, something that felt alive. Across the yard, Thomas Whitfield stood near the barn's shadow, watching through the dark. The lantern in his hand threw his face into half-light, eyes full of hate, mouth tight with resolve. "That drifter's gonna learn who runs this ranch," he hissed to the night. He lifted the whip from its nail, coiling it tight in his palm. The wind carried a warning that morning. It moved through Red Hollow like a restless spirit, rattling the shutters, stirring the dust, setting the horses on edge. Ellie felt it in her bones before she even stepped outside. She rose before the first light, as always. Her hands found the wash basin, the cold water biting at her skin. The house was quiet, her father still asleep upstairs, and for a fleeting moment, she could pretend peace lived here. Outside, frost lay over the ground like breath. The corral fence shimmered white in the dawn. She could see Silas near the far field, already working, his broad back bending and rising with the rhythm of the shovel. For one heartbeat watching him, she forgot to feel afraid. Then the door upstairs slammed. The moment shattered. Thomas Whitfield's voice rolled down the hall like thunder. "Where's that useless girl?" Ellie stiffened. The sound of his boots on the stairs made her stomach knot. He came into view with the same red-rimmed eyes, the same flask in hand. His shirt hung open, suspenders loose, half man, half ruin. "Morning, Pa," she said quietly. He sneered. "Don't you pa me. You've been soft lately. I see it in you. I've done everything you asked." He stalked closer, the smell of whiskey and tobacco wrapping around her. "You've done more than that. I saw how you look at that hand." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "He's just working here, that's all. That's all." He laughed, rough and sharp. "You forget whose name's on this land, girl? You forget who feeds you." Ellie took a step back. This was Mama's ranch first. The words were out before she could stop them. The back of his hand came fast, splitting her lip. The sound cracked through the kitchen. She staggered, hand flying to her mouth, the taste of iron blooming on her tongue. Thomas's breath came heavy. "You don't speak her name to me." Silence fell. Only the clock ticked. Then footsteps behind him. Silas stood in the doorway, shadow filling it. His eyes went to Ellie's bleeding lip, then to the man who'd caused it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Put the bottle down, Mr. Whitfield." Thomas turned, a twisted grin spreading. "You again. You just can't keep from sticking your nose in. Can you?" "I don't take kindly to a man hittin' a woman," Silas said, every word carved from stone. "This is my daughter," Thomas snapped. "My blood, my right." Silas stepped closer. "You lost that right when you raised your hand to her." Thomas's jaw flexed. "You think you can come into my house and—" He moved faster than a man his size should have. The whip appeared from behind his chair, curling out like a strike of lightning. But Silas was already moving. The lash cracked through the air and met his arm instead of Ellie's. The sound was sharp enough to ring through the rafters. The leather tore through his sleeve, slicing skin, but he didn't flinch. He caught the whip mid-swing just like before. Blood ran down his forearm, dark and quick, but his eyes stayed fixed on Thomas. "Don't," Silas said, voice low and shaking with restraint. "Not again." For a heartbeat, Thomas froze, staring at the man who refused to yield. Then fury overtook reason. He lunged. The two men collided like thunder and earth. Chairs toppled, the table crashed sideways. Ellie screamed, ducking back as glass shattered. Silas took the hit but drove forward, pinning Thomas's arm against the wall. The older man swung with the bottle, catching Silas across the shoulder. It broke, showering them both with liquor and glass. "Get off me," Thomas roared. Silas's voice came out rough, close to the edge. "You're done, old man." He shoved him back. Thomas stumbled, hit the floor, wheezing. Silas stood over him, chest heaving. The whip hung from his hand, limp and harmless now. "You ever touch her again," he said, breath low and even, "and I swear to God, they'll be planting you in this ground you think you own." For a moment, neither moved. Then Silas dropped the whip and turned to Ellie. "You all right?" She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "You're bleeding. It'll heal." But she could see how deep the cut ran down his forearm. Blood soaked through his torn sleeve, dripping to the floor. She grabbed a rag from the counter, pressing it to the wound, her hands shaking. He didn't pull away. Thomas groaned from the floor, clutching his side. "You're fired," he spat. "Get off my land." Silas looked down at him. "Gladly." Then his eyes found Ellie's. "Pack what you can. You ain't staying here tonight." Her breath hitched. "He'll kill you if you—" "He can try." There was a certainty in his tone that terrified and comforted her all at once. She swallowed hard. "Where would we go?" "There's a town south of here, Cold Creek. A couple of hours by horse." Ellie looked toward the stairs, toward her mother's portrait still hanging there in dust and silence. She thought of all the years stolen, all the bruises hidden. She nodded once. "All right." Silas wiped the blood from his arm and took her hand. Rough, calloused, steady. For the first time, she didn't pull away. The two of them slipped into the fading light as the sky bruised violet over the plains. Behind them, the ranch groaned in the wind, the windows flickering with the rage of the man they left behind. Thomas Whitfield staggered to his feet, hand trembling as he watched them vanish into the dusk. The whip lay coiled at his boots, forgotten. He spat, voice rough and hateful. "Run all you want, girl. Ain't nowhere out here you can hide from me." He reached for the rifle above the mantel. The prairie was a sheet of silver under the moon. Clouds hung low and heavy, and the wind moved in long sighs over the grass, carrying the promise of rain or ruin. Ellie clung to the back of Silas's horse as they rode hard from Red Hollow Ranch. The mare's hooves pounded against the earth, throwing dust and frost behind them. Every jolt sent pain through her ribs, But she didn't complain. The air bit at her cheeks, stung her eyes, and filled her lungs with the wild taste of freedom she'd never known before. Behind them, the lights of the house grew smaller, then vanished into darkness. "How far to Cold Creek?" she shouted over the wind. "Couple hours if the trail holds," Silas answered, voice rough with strain. "Longer if the storm hits." She glanced upward. The clouds were crawling closer, thick and bruised. Thunder rolled low across the hills. "Can we make it?" "We'll try." That was all he said. But in his voice, she heard a promise deeper than the words themselves. They rode until the first raindrops hit, cold and sharp. Lightning flashed over the ridges, showing them the narrow canyon ahead. Silas slowed the horse, eyes scanning the terrain. "We'll cut through here," he said. "The pass'll hide our tracks." Ellie nodded, clutching tighter to him as the wind roared through the canyon walls. The scent of wet sage and stone filled the air. Behind them, somewhere in the night, a rifle cracked. The sound echoed like thunder, close enough to feel in her chest. "Was that?" "Yeah," Silas growled. "He's comin'." He spurred the horse harder, but the trail twisted sharp and narrow. The canyon walls rose on either side, trapping the storm's voice. Another shot. Sparks flew off a rock near her foot. She gasped, ducking low against Silas's back. "Hold on," he barked. The mare lunged forward, breath steaming, mane whipped by wind and rain. The path curved, dropping steeply. The world blurred in streaks of gray and lightning. Silas guided the horse down, steady and unyielding. Behind them, thunder became hoofbeats. Thomas Whitfield giving chase through the storm, his curses swallowed by the wind. "Silas, he'll kill you," Ellie cried. "Not if I kill his trail first." He yanked the reins hard, cutting into a side ravine. The horse stumbled once but regained its footing. Mud sprayed across them, cold and slick. They rode until the canyon opened into a hollow ringed with boulders and stunted pines. Silas pulled the horse to a stop beneath an overhang of stone. Rain hammered the earth, the sky splitting with light. He slid down first, boots splashing in the mud, then reached up to help her. His hand caught hers, strong, steady despite the tremor in his arm. "Come on," he said softly. They moved under the rock's shelter. Water poured down the edge like a curtain, sealing them away from the rest of the world. Ellie's breath came fast, half from fear, half from something she couldn't name. The sound of the storm was deafening, the world reduced to the closeness between them. Silas checked his rifle, then his arm. Blood still seeped through the torn sleeve from the whip's lash. "You're hurt again," she whispered. He shook his head. "It's nothin'." She frowned, tearing a strip from her shawl. "You keep sayin' that." Before he could protest, she took his arm and wrapped it tight. Her hands were small but sure, and her touch burned through the cold. When she tied the knot, she realized how close they stood. The storm painted his face in flickering light, hard angles softened by rain. His eyes, that deep storm gray, met hers and didn't look away. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For stayin' brave." Ellie's throat ached. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." "Fear ain't the opposite of courage," he said. "Giving up is. And you didn't." Lightning split the sky. For a moment, it illuminated the canyon mouth. And there, in the distance, the faint flicker of another lantern. Thomas. He was still coming. Silas's jaw tightened. "We can't stay here long." "Then where?" "There's an old trapper's cabin near the ridge, 1/2 mile north. If we can reach it before he sees the tracks." He stopped when he saw her shaking. "You cold?" She nodded, arms wrapped around herself. "I'll be fine." He hesitated, then unclasped his coat. "Here." "I can't." "Take it." He draped it over her shoulders before she could argue. It was still warm from his body, smelling faintly of gunpowder and cedar. The fabric swallowed her frame, heavy and protective. She looked up at him, words caught in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" He met her gaze, steady. "Because no one ever did it for the ones I should have saved." Something cracked inside her. not from fear, but from the quiet sorrow in his voice. "Silas," she began, but the sound of distant hoofbeats cut her off. He turned toward the canyon mouth, eyes narrowing. "He's close. Can we outrun him?" "No," he said grimly, "but maybe we can outwait him." He doused their lantern, plunging them into darkness. The storm outside raged on, thunder covering every sound. Ellie pressed herself against the stone, heart hammering. She could hear Silas's breathing beside her, slow and even despite the danger. A shadow moved outside, then another. Through the sheets of rain, she saw the silhouette of her father, lantern swinging, rifle slung over his shoulder. He stopped not 50 yards away, shouting into the storm. "Eleanor, you think that man can save you? You're mine, girl. You hear me? Mine." His voice echoed through the canyon, fading under thunder. Silas's hand found hers in the dark. "Don't move," he whispered. She couldn't. They stood like that for what felt like forever, two fugitives bound by fear and something far more dangerous than fear. Hope. Finally, the light moved on, swallowed by rain. Only then did she exhale, shoulders trembling. Silas squeezed her hand once before letting go. "We'll leave at first light," he said quietly. Ellie nodded, though she couldn't see him anymore. When she lay down on the cold earth that night, she felt his coat pulled over her shoulders and the steady sound of rain against stone. For the first time in years, she dreamed without waking to screams. When the storm broke, dawn came slow and bruised. The sky was a band of pale rose above the canyon, its light filtering through the ragged mist that clung to the earth. Steam rose from the wet grass, and every leaf glittered like glass. Ellie stirred beneath Silas's coat. Her body ached from the hard ground, but the ache was gentle compared to the years before. For the first time, she woke without dread clawing at her ribs. Silas was already awake, crouched near the mouth of their shelter, studying the open trail. The light touched his jaw, outlining the stubble there, the hard set of his mouth. He looked carved out of something older than stone, part man, part warning to the world. "Morning," she whispered. He turned, offering a faint nod. "You sleep. A little." She hesitated, then added, "You didn't." "I'm used to it." The air still smelled of rain and smoke, though no fire had been lit. She moved closer, wrapping his coat tighter around her shoulders. Her hands, raw and cracked, disappeared inside the heavy folds. "Think he's gone?" she asked. "For now," Silas said, rising to his feet. "But men like him don't quit until they've burned everything they touch." She knew he was right. Thomas Whitfield had the kind of rage that never cooled, the kind that turned love into possession, grief into cruelty. Silas glanced at her hands. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." He passed her a small tin from his saddlebag, dry jerky and hard bread. She chewed in silence, every sound in the canyon seeming too loud. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Last night, when you said no one ever did it for the ones you should have saved, who were you talking about?" He paused. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My sister." Ellie looked up. He wasn't meeting her eyes. His gaze was fixed somewhere far away, as if the horizon itself had turned into a memory. "She was 17, he said quietly. "Same eyes as you. Same way of looking at the world, even when it hurt to look." Her name was June. The name hung between them, fragile as breath. She got herself tied to a man like Whitfield. Drank means hit harder. "I told her to leave, but—" He stopped, his throat working. "One winter, she did. Came to my cabin in Wyoming with a busted lip and a broken wrist. I swore I'd get her safe." Ellie said nothing. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I went out to gather wood," Silas continued. "By the time I came back, he'd followed her. Took her back by force. I rode after them come spring. Found the cabin burned to the ground. The wind shifted, brushing against the cliff face. She didn't make it." Ellie's heart twisted. "I'm sorry." He finally looked at her then, and the weight of his sorrow nearly stole her breath. That's why I can't ride off this time. I told myself I was done fightin' other people's wars. But, he exhaled, low and bitter. When I saw him raise his hand to you, I saw her. I couldn't let it happen again. Silence settled between them. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Ellie reached for his arm without thinking. You didn't fail her, she said softly. You were just too late. That's not the same. He gave a rough laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. Feels the same. Then maybe you save me, and it'll start to feel different. For a moment, neither of them moved. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the mist gold. His hand came to rest over hers. Tentative, calloused, warm. Maybe, he said. They packed quickly after that. The trail north wound through low brush and the black skeletons of cottonwoods. Birds darted overhead, and in the distance, a hawk cried out, sharp and lonely. By noon, the air was thick with heat again. The world looked washed clean except for the tracks behind them. Silas stopped suddenly. Damn! Ellie followed his gaze. There, pressed deep into the mud beside their own, were fresh hoofprints. He's close, Silas murmured. A chill slid down her spine. They spurred forward, cutting through a narrow stretch where the canyon walls leaned in close. The air cooler, darker. Every sound echoed. The clop of hooves, the whisper of wind, and Ellie could almost feel her father's presence closing in. Silas, she said, her voice barely a breath. What happens if he catches us? He didn't look at her. He won't. But if he does? He glanced back then, eyes hard as flint. Then I make sure he doesn't hurt you again. Not ever. The words struck like thunder, not loud, but final. The canyon widened again, spilling out onto open grassland. In the distance, Ellie saw the faint outline of an old cabin against the trees. Its roof sagged, the chimney leaning, but it was shelter. There, Silas said. We'll rest an hour, maybe two. They reached it just as the sun began to drop, painting the world in amber. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and cedar. A rusted stove sat in the corner, a faded quilt still draped over a cot. Silas checked every corner before nodding. Safe enough. Ellie sank down on the cot, exhaustion tugging at her bones. How long can we keep running? As long as we need to. She smiled faintly. You talk like a man who's used to running. He leaned his rifle against the wall, half smiling back. Maybe I am. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. For the first time, their silence wasn't fear, it was understanding. As darkness crept in, Silas built a small fire. The light danced over his face, softening the lines of weariness there. Ellie watched him quietly, her heartbeat slowing, her mind filled with the rhythm of the flames. Silas. Yeah. If we make it through this, she hesitated. What then? He looked up from the fire, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Then you get your life back, and maybe I stop running from mine. She nodded, smiling faintly, though tears blurred her vision. Then let's make sure we do. Outside, an owl called into the night, distant, mournful. But beyond the sound of wings and wind, neither of them heard the crunch of a boot in the dark. A shadow moved near the window. The faint glint of steel caught the firelight. Thomas Whitfield had found them. The fire had burned low, its light shrinking to a trembling amber glow. Outside, the night pressed thick and silent, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Silas sat with his back to the wall, rifle across his lap. He'd felt something, an instinct older than thought. The way the wind stopped moving, the faint crunch of frost beyond the window. He turned his head slightly. Ellie, he whispered. She stirred from where she lay wrapped in the quilt, drowsy. Stay quiet. The tone of his voice pulled her fully awake. She sat up, the firelight catching the pale worry in her eyes. What is it? He didn't answer, only motioned for her to stay down. His hand reached for the lantern, dimming the wick until the room sank into near darkness. The shadows stretched long across the floorboards. Then came the sound again. A step, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be the wind. Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs. She clutched the edge of the quilt, every muscle locked. Silas moved toward the door, his body low, silent as a wolf. He cocked the rifle just once, the click barely audible. Outside, the night breathed. Then, thud, the latch jolted. Ellie gasped, hand over her mouth. Another shove. The hinges groaned, wood splintering. "Stay back," Silas hissed. The door burst open with a crack like gunfire. Cold air and rain swept inside, and with them Thomas Whitfield. He filled the doorway like a curse, soaked to the bone, hat dripping, eyes wild. His face was a twisted ruin of fury and drink. The rifle in his hand gleamed under the lightning's flash. "You think you can steal what's mine?" he roared. His voice thundered through the cabin. Silas raised his gun. "She ain't yours," Thomas sneered. "You think she belongs to you, boy? She belongs to no one," Silas said evenly. "Least of all a man who beats her bloody." Thomas's lip curled. "You talk like you know something about pain." "I do." The silence after that was knife-thin. Then the old man lunged forward. The shot came first, deafening in the small space. Wood splintered near Silas's shoulder. He fired back, the blast lighting the room white for an instant. Thomas stumbled, cursing, ducking behind the doorframe. Ellie screamed, "Stay down!" Silas barked. He rolled, reloading in seconds. Another shot shattered the lamp's glass. Darkness fell completely, save for the fire's dim red glow. The cabin filled with smoke, dust, and breathless terror. Thomas's voice came again, ragged, feral. "You can't hide her from me. She's my blood. She's your prisoner. I made her what she is. Then you made her suffer." Lightning ripped across the sky outside, showing Thomas for a single instant. His face twisted, the barrel of his rifle lifting. Silas didn't hesitate. He moved first. The next gunshot was final. The sound echoed through the canyon, sharp and endless. Then silence. Rain whispered against the roof. Silas stood in the doorway, chest heaving, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. Thomas lay sprawled half inside, half out, the mud already swallowing him. Ellie stared, her breath frozen. The moment stretched and broke like glass. "Silas," she whispered. He lowered the rifle slowly, eyes fixed on the man at his feet. The wind pulled at his coat, tugged at his hair. "It's done," he said, voice low. She rose shakily and went to him. Her hand trembled as she touched his arm. "He would have killed you." He nodded once. "He would have killed us both." For a long while neither spoke. The rain softened. The fire guttered, throwing ghostly light over the cabin walls. When she finally found her voice, it was a whisper of something fragile and human. "I never thought it'd end." Silas turned to her, the storm in his eyes fading to something else. Tired, steady, kind. "Endiness just another way of saying beginning," he murmured. "Question is what you make of it." Her throat tightened. "And what about you? What will you make of yours?" He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred. "Don't know. Ain't been free in a long time." Ellie's voice trembled. "You are now." The words hung there like a vow. He exhaled slowly, as if letting go of years of ghosts. "Maybe I am." The firelight flickered between them. She reached up, brushing a streak of soot from his cheek. Her fingers lingered, and for once he didn't pull away. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, Ellie, you saved yourself. I just showed up." Her eyes glimmered. Maybe both can be true. The silence that followed was deep, heavy with something unspoken. Something neither of them dared name just yet. Outside, the rain eased into a mist. The world smelled of smoke, mud, and rebirth. Silas stepped past the body into the night. The dawn was only a few hours off, the horizon paling. He stood there for a long time, shoulders hunched, staring at nothing. Ellie joined him quietly. The wind caught her hair, sent it spilling over her face. She didn't look back at what lay behind them. "Where will you go?" she asked. He glanced sideways at her. Don't rightly know. There's always more road. And me? He hesitated, his voice rough. That's for you to decide. Her lips curved faintly. Then I decide not to be left behind. He looked at her, truly looked at the defiance, the softness, the light that refused to die. Something broke open in him then, something he'd locked away for years. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. Ellie Whitfield, he murmured, his voice like gravel and prayer. You're gonna be the death of my quiet. She smiled through tears. Then maybe you were never meant for quiet, Silas Boone. The night sighed, and the storm moved on, leaving the stars clean and bright above them. Dawn broke soft and muted, spilling pink and gold across the canyon. The rain had left the world washed and glimmering, every blade of grass heavy with dew. Silas and Ellie worked in silence, gathering the remnants of Thomas Whitfield's threat. His rifle, the soaked remnants of his coat, and the bloody remnants of the cabin door. Finally, they approached the shallow depression at the canyon's edge. The earth was soft from the storm, but it would have to do. Silas knelt first, hands rough and steady, brushing dirt from the hollow. Ellie followed, kneeling beside him. Her fingers brushed his as they passed the soil, sending a jolt up her arm she couldn't quite name. This is it, Silas murmured. A man's sins get buried where they belong. Ellie swallowed, nodding. A man who hurt so many, including you. He didn't answer at once. His gaze lingered on the place where Thomas's body would rest, then rose to hers. I never thought I'd see a day like this, he said softly. Nor did I think I'd stand beside someone who makes it feel possible to believe in more than vengeance. Her throat tightened. The words struck a chord she hadn't realized was tuned so tight, so raw. She nodded, brushing mud from her skirts. You saved me, Silas. And I... She hesitated. The canyon wind swirled around them, carrying the scent of wet pine and earth. I can't imagine going back. He looked down at her then, the intensity of his gray eyes softened by exhaustion and relief. Then don't, he said quietly. The world's wide. There's enough land for us to live on it our way. They dug together, the labor slow and methodical. Each shovelful of mud became a testament, not just to the end of Thomas's tyranny but to the endurance of survival, to the birth of trust. Silas's hand brushed hers again, this time lingering just long enough for her pulse to race. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, drying the wet earth and burning off the remnants of the storm. When the hole was ready, Thomas's body was laid to rest beneath the cold ground. They covered him slowly, in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken words, grief, and the first fragile hint of something tender. When the last of the dirt fell into place, Ellie stepped back, shoulders trembling. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He's gone, she said softly. Yes, Silas agreed. Then he turned to her, voice low, almost uncertain. We're not safe yet. The sheriff may ask questions. Folks might whisper. But... His words faltered, and then he said, I don't care what the world thinks. Care about you. And if we're gonna do this, we do it together. Ellie's heart stuttered, a slow bloom of warmth unfolding. She stepped closer, brushing mud from his coat. Together, she whispered. For a moment, the canyon seemed to hold its breath. The wind softened, birds began to call in the distance, and the world felt immense and quiet. Silas's hand lifted to her cheek, rough and calloused, tracing the line of her jaw with surprising tenderness. Her eyes closed at the touch. You're brave, he said quietly. I can't tell you how much that amazes me. I didn't think I was, she replied, voice low. Not before you came. His thumb lingered on her cheek, soft against the grime and tears. Then maybe it's just been hiding. Her lips parted slightly, uncertain, caught between fear and the desperate longing of the heart. He leaned closer and she didn't pull back. Not when the first brush of his lips touched hers, tentative, a question more than an answer. The world narrowed to the two of them, to the warmth of calloused hands, the trembling press of hearts learning trust. The kiss deepened, slow and hesitant at first, then surer as each recognized the other's need. Mud, rain, and sweat clung to them, but it didn't matter. Nothing outside that canyon mattered but the moment, raw and intimate. Ellie whispered against his chest. I never thought I'd feel safe again. You're safe, he said, arms tightening around her. And I'm not letting go. For a long moment, they stood there, the canyon walls silent witnesses, the sky above burning gold and pink, a promise of a world untouched by cruelty. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and shaken, Ellie met his eyes with a faint smile. What now? Silas tilted his head, thoughtful. Now we rest, then we ride. We find a place no one can touch us, somewhere we can start over. Her hands found his again. And stay together? Always, he said. The sound of birds calling, the scent of pine, the soft rustle of the breeze through the wet grass. These were the first markers of a new life. One built not on fear or violence, but on shared strength, trust, and the quiet, stubborn bloom of love. As the sun climbed higher, warming their faces, Silas pulled her close. We've got a long road ahead, he said, lips brushing her hair. I'll walk it with you, she replied, voice steady now. And as the canyon held them in its embrace, for the first time in years, Ellie felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The past lay buried beneath the soil, and the future stretched ahead, wild, uncertain, and theirs to claim. Cold Creek rose from the prairie like a whisper of civilization. Small wooden buildings pressed against the wind, smoke curling from chimneys. Dusty streets glimmered in the afternoon sun, and the distant clip-clop of horses echoed against the saloon doors and the general store. Silas guided Ellie through the town with careful eyes. Their horses moved silently, tied behind a weathered stable, watching as townsfolk went about their business. Ellie's pulse thrummed, not from exertion this time, but from anticipation, from the uncertain gaze of strangers who had no idea what had hunted them. This is it? She asked, voice low. Yes, he said, scanning the streets. We lie low for a bit, find work, keep to ourselves. Ellie's fingers brushed the edge of her coat where the mud had stained it. What if someone recognizes me? Silas's hand found hers. Then we tell the truth carefully. You're not the girl your father made you believe you were. You're stronger. She nodded, swallowing hard. She was beginning to believe it. Here in the bright openness of a new town, surrounded by faces she didn't have to fear. The first stop was the general store. The bell above the door rang softly as they entered. The clerk, a graying man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, looked up. Can I help you folks? He asked, voice hesitant. Yes, Silas said evenly. We're looking for work. Day jobs, odd jobs. We can pay as we go. The clerk raised an eyebrow but nodded. Boardings down the street. You can start at the livery, feeding the horses, cleaning stalls. A couple of dollars a day. Ellie's chest lightened. Thank you, she whispered. They walked down Main Street, side by side, the quiet closeness between them growing with every step. The tension of constant fear had begun to ease, replaced by a new awareness. The small, deliberate gestures of togetherness. Hands brushing, shoulders nearly touching, shared glances that lingered. For the first time, Ellie noticed how strong Silas's arms were, the curve of his shoulders beneath his worn coat, the way he carried himself like a man who'd seen too much and yet refused to be broken. By the time they reached the livery, the shadows were long and soft, painting the streets in honeyed light. Silas led Ellie inside, introducing her to the stable master, a wiry man with a quick smile. She can handle the feed, Silas said simply, and mucking out stalls. The stable master glanced at her, measuring her. Think you can? Ellie squared her shoulders. I can manage. Hours passed as they worked the stables, hands roughened by hay, the smell of horses, manure, and leather grounding them in reality. Silas worked silently beside her, the occasional word of instruction enough to anchor her. By evening, as they brushed down the last horse, Silas turned to her, eyes soft. You did well today. Ellie smiled faintly, warmth threading through her bones. Thanks to you. Don't give me all the credit. His gaze lingered on hers, steady and intimate. You're braver than you know. For a moment, they stood close, the world narrowing again to the quiet of the stables, the fading light, the shared understanding between two souls who had faced death together. Then a shadow fell across the doorway. The sheriff, tall, broad-shouldered, with a no-nonsense expression. He stepped into the stable. His eyes swept over them, lingering on Silas's rifle slung casually across his back. You Boone? The sheriff asked, voice low. Silas stepped forward, posture relaxed but alert. Yes, sir. The sheriff's gaze shifted to Ellie. And this girl? Ellie's heart began to hammer. She swallowed, forcing her voice steady. Just someone I met along the way. We're, travelers. The sheriff studied them both, then nodded slowly. Heard there was trouble at Red Hollow. Something about a man killed out there? Silas's jaw tightened imperceptibly. We found him, yes. Had to defend ourselves. The sheriff's eyes lingered on him. You're sure it was self-defense? Silas nodded. Stone-cold certain. The lawman's gaze softened fractionally. I'll need your names, addresses, whatever you've got to give. Ellie's hands trembled, but Silas placed a steadying hand over hers. We'll cooperate, he said. Truth first, as far as we can tell it. The sheriff scribbled notes. The shadow of suspicion in his eyes softened only by the firm resolve in Silas's posture. When the man finally left, Ellie let out a shaky breath. Silas's thumb brushed the back of her hand. See? Nothing to fear, he murmured. She smiled, leaning slightly toward him. I think I'm starting to believe that. Silas's lips twitched in a faint, rare smile. Good. I'm glad. Later, as the sun dipped behind the buildings and Cold Creek streets grew quiet, they walked side by side back to the boarding house. Silas's arm brushed hers, intentionally, deliberately, and she felt a shiver. Not of fear, but of longing. I don't know what comes next, she admitted softly. He looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the gold of the setting sun. Then we make it up as we go. Together. Her heart thumped. Together, she echoed. And as the stars emerged over Cold Creek, painting the sky silver, Ellie realized something. She had never been freer, never been more alive. In the quiet streets, their shadows merged into one. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a chain. The past was behind them, buried in Red Hollow, and in front of them stretched a horizon wild with possibility, danger, and love. The horizon burned gold and crimson as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over Cold Creek. Ellie stood at the edge of the boardwalk, the wind tangling her hair, the scent of sage and smoke in the air. For the first time in years, she felt the steady pulse of life beneath her feet. Not fear, not terror, not the weight of a tyrant's hand, but freedom. Silas came up behind her, his silhouette solid and reassuring. He didn't speak at first, only rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. She leaned back against him, the rough fabric of his coat grounding her. You're quiet, he murmured. I'm thinking, she admitted, about all of it. Red Hollow, the canyon, the storm you. He chuckled softly, a low sound that vibrated through her chest. I think about it too. About the way you didn't run from me when I came for you. About the way you've held on to yourself through all of it. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. I didn't hold on alone. Neither did I. His gaze softened. We've walked through fire together, Ellie. And now, he trailed off, letting the words hang like smoke in the fading sunlight. The town around them was quiet, the saloon's swinging doors creaking with the evening breeze. The sheriff had left hours ago, satisfied with their account, though his eyes had lingered on Silas just a little too long. Rumor and gossip would follow them, but it felt like dust against stone, inconsequential compared to what they had survived. Ellie turned fully toward him. Do you ever think about leaving? He shook his head slowly. Not with you. Her heart skipped. Then what do we do now? Now? he said, taking both her hands in his. We live. We take what's ours, not land, not money, but the life we deserve. Together. A tremor ran through her fingers as she pressed them into his. Together, she whispered. The sun sank lower, spilling the world in molten fire. Silas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb lingering on her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into him instinctively, as though all the years of fear and oppression could be erased in that single quiet moment. He bent down slowly, eyes locking with hers, voice low and certain. Ellie Whitfield, I swear, no man will ever raise a hand against you again. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and sudden, but she smiled through them. And you'll stay by my side? Always, he said, his lips brushing hers in a kiss gentle as dawn, warm and grounding. The kiss deepened, slow and tender, a promise forged in fire, rain, and blood. When they finally pulled apart, Silas held her close, forehead to forehead. The world narrowed to the beat of their hearts. You're mine now, he said quietly. She shook her head, smiling through tears. No, we're ours. He laughed softly, rough and low, the sound a bomb she hadn't known she needed. Yours, mine, ours. It's all the same if we're together. The streets of Cold Creek stretched out before them, golden in the sunset. For the first time, the past was truly behind them, buried beneath Red Hollow's soil, under the storm's fury, and in the canyon's shadows. The future, wide and wild and untamed, lay ahead. Silas turned toward the livery where their horses waited. We ride at first light. There's land south of here, open, wild. We make our own home. Ellie nodded, heart swelling with hope. And no one can take it from us? No one, he said firmly, squeezing her hand. Not him, not the law, not the world. They walked back to the boarding house together, shoulders brushing, fingers entwined, and the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Inside, the small room felt warm, safe, and theirs, if only for a night. As she prepared for bed, Silas stood at the doorway, watching her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse race. Ellie? Yes. He stepped closer, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. Sleep well tonight. You've earned it. I will, she said softly, because I know you'll be here in the morning. He smiled, the faintest curve of lips, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Always, he murmured. They settled together on the cot, the weight of the world finally lifted. Hands clasped, breaths synchronized, hearts tethered, they drifted into the quiet, the room filled with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the faint smoke of the dying fire. Ellie's last conscious thought as sleep overtook her was of Silas's steady heartbeat beneath her hand, a rhythm that promised protection, safety, and love. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. When morning came, the sun rose over Cold Creek, spilling light across the streets, the stables, and the hills beyond. Silas and Ellie rode out together, the horizon stretching endlessly, alive with promise. Behind them lay Red Hollow, Thomas Whitfield, the storms, and the past. Ahead of them lay a life forged from resilience, courage, and the slow, steady bloom of love that had grown between two hearts scarred but unbroken. As they rode side by side, the wind whipping through their hair, Silas glanced at Ellie. Ready for forever? She smiled, leaning closer. With you? Always. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden under the rising sun. And for the first time, they didn't look back. Together, they rode into the wild, free from fear, free from cruelty, and free to love.